Moving from India to Germany was a very unforgettable experience for me. It was my first international travel. The year was 2000 in June. I remember it like it was yesterday. If someone had made a video of that trip, it would have ranked in the top 10 funny videos for that year for sure. Probably shared this experience with some of you. I got off the flight in Frankfurt and picked up my luggage and put this on the trolley. As a student, we got to take extra books and stuff. And the only problem was the trolley wouldn't move. The harder I tried to push, it just was resisting. But for everybody around me, it just moved seamlessly. You just come, grab the luggage, put it, and just go, because I didn't realize that you had to press the trolley to release the brake. And it was written in German back in the day, and we didn't have those kinds of trolleys in Chennai airport. I think it was only in the last 2 years they changed it. So after much resistance, accidentally I pressed the brake and it moved. And then I went and saw this escalator, and I was scratching my head. I had 3 big suitcases, like, how do I take the trolley on an escalator? And then I moved each bag one at a time down the escalator. And after I moved my 3rd bag, I saw right next to it was an elevator, and people were just walking out with their trolleys effortlessly. And then I got into a train and went to the city. It was Freiburg, and we had to take a tram, and I had to buy a ticket, and I didn't have change, and so I went and bought, this is the most expensive cherries I never needed, that I got for like 10, it used to be marks, Deutsche Marks, to get the change. And when I went to buy the ticket, there's a guy in front of me. He gets this ticket, and the machine gives him change. I need not have spent 10 marks to buy ticket. And then we go to our language school. It was the first day they gave us free accommodation, and there was a volunteer who was distributing comforters and blankets, which we could take to our dorm and get it ready. And this was the first time I'm seeing a comforter. In Chennai, we never use comforters. Never gets that cold. And just trying to figure out how to do this. So when I came back to talk to him, there were people from 10 other countries like me having the exact same questions and similar questions. One guy thought that the blanket you use, the cover for the comforter, was meant for him to sleep inside. And he tried to fit inside it, and it didn't fit him. So he was upset. And there was another guy from India who came, and he was asking him, where is the bucket and the mug? I want to take a shower every day. And he's not used to using showers. And the guy who was volunteering, they call it Zivis, they do civil dienst. He was training to be a lawyer. Germany, you have to serve for 1 year in the army or do this. He was frustrated. He said, this is the worst day of my life. You guys are making me go crazy. And that's when I realized, we all have similar experiences. Perhaps when you made your first move, you enter a new country with new language, new culture. You need a framework to live, isn't it? We need a blueprint. But God is not leaving his children like that. As we read today, he has taken them out of Egypt. For 400 years, they lived in another country. He's bringing them out in a dramatic way, and he just doesn't want to leave them to figure it out. He says, let me give you a blueprint of how you can live when you enter this new nation. Francis Schaeffer wrote a great book critiquing European culture. It's called How Then Should We Live? And this is basically God telling his children, how should you live when you enter this new country called Canaan? How should you and I live as God's children who have tasted his grace in our lives? 3 things, as usual, we are going to look at from today's passage. First, we're going to talk about the covenantal God, the nature of God who makes this covenant. Second, we are going to talk about covenantal principles. And third, we are going to talk about covenantal outcome. So first, we're going to look at from this passage, what we understand about God and who makes this covenant. Verse 1 and 2, it begins by saying, "And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God." And this is a loaded statement. First of all, God is identifying himself with a very specific name. He is describing who he is. He says, "I am Yahweh Elohim," which is the name of a covenantal God. It's a covenantal name for God. That's how he identified himself with his people. When they hear the name, they know that this was a God who is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Last week we looked at the Abrahamic covenant where God already promised him, after 400 years, your descendants will take this land. And 400 years have passed when God is now reestablishing his covenant now with the nation of Israel. And true to his promise, he did what he promised to Abraham. He got them out. Our God is a God of history. These people have had a history with this God and his covenant, and he has remained true to his word. But what is very important about this, and something which you and I can miss, which will completely change how we read this passage, which is usually called the 10 Commandments, is when he makes this covenant, the timing of making this covenant. God is making this covenant after he redeems them from their life of slavery in Egypt, not before. It's very important to understand this distinction. He is not meeting them when they are in slavery in Egypt and saying, "All right, guys, if you fix your life now, if you become good and follow all these 10 commandments I'm going to give you, then maybe I'll redeem you from slavery. I'll redeem you from the hand of Pharaoh." No. He says, "I'm going to redeem you first because that's who I am. I am a covenantal God. My redeeming you is not based on you getting your act together." And in that sense, even this Mosaic covenant is an expression of God's covenant of grace. Grace always comes first. And how God makes this covenant is also fascinating. It says, "And God spoke all these words." The word in English, you miss this, but the word for word, the word of God, logos in Greek, in Hebrew, is davar. And in Hebrew, it's beautiful. It says, "Elohim, davar, kol davar, amar, Yahweh Elohim." The word is repeated multiple times. What is the significance of that is they can now hear God speak to them as a nation. But why is this significant? So far we have seen God making individual covenants, right? With Adam, with Noah, with Abraham, and then later on you would see he's making it with Isaac and Jacob and even Moses on the burning bush. And all these individuals were not perfect people. They were like you and I. They kept falling, they kept failing, they kept messing up, and still God would go and make a covenant. Now he is doing the same, not with an individual, but a whole nation, his covenant people, who do the same thing as a nation. He brings them out of Egypt, they grumble. They're not happy with the things that they are given. They want water, food. They're still telling Moses, "Oh, we would have been better in Egypt." And God is not saying, "I'm done with you guys." He's now graciously still speaking to them. Isn't that amazing? What a gracious God that we have. But his voice is coming with such audio and visual displays, so people know that this is really God who is talking to them. And then he's also explaining why he is making this covenant with the people. He says, verse 2, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." One of the reasons why this is called a covenant is it has 5 of the essential characteristics of a covenant. First is the prologue. Before you make a covenant, you tell who is making a covenant with whom and for what. And he is giving exactly the reasons as to why he is making this covenant. What is the relationship? He said, the relationship I have with you, because of which I'm making this covenant, is because I am the one who brought you out of Egypt. By reason of having rescued Israel from slavery in Egypt, Yahweh had a claim on his chosen people. It's called in Oriental language a hesed relationship, which is translated as a loyalty required in response to loyalty shown. In ancient Israel and in the Semitic region, they believed if a person A had voluntarily rescued or significantly aided a person B, then the person B had a true and lasting moral obligation to person A. That's just how it was. What Yahweh had done for Israel was truly remarkable. There's no parallel in world history of that happening with any other group of people at any other point of time. He had rescued an entire people from bondage and slavery, leading them out of a superpower's oppression through miraculous means. And so God wants them to first understand who he is and why he is making this covenant, and that they need to first know that God wants to establish this covenant because he has already redeemed them, not that they can be redeemed by doing the things he's going to ask them to do. He wants them to know, do you want to figure out how to live in this new place I am taking you? Well, you need to first get to know me and trust me and love me and allow me to help you to thrive in this new place. I like how Tim Keller gives a phrase about 10 Commandments. He says, we are supposed to look at the 10 Commandments romantically. Yeah, that's right. You heard it right. Romantically. I'm like, you never combine those two things, 10 Commandments and romantic perspective. And he says this is what he means by that. He says God is now communicating to the people of Israel, asking them to have a loyal love relationship with him like marriage. Because he is a jealous God. He so loves them, he doesn't want them to be carried away in directions and paths that will be disruptive and destructive to them. He says, I love you, we are like being married to one another. And if you're married, it's natural for a spouse to say, I have to have first place in this relationship. In fact, for a marriage to work, that's the only way the marriage can work. It is true that sometimes marriages get disrupted and hurt because people do bad things like drinking or drugs or porn or affairs and things like that. But I think, especially in a place like Silicon Valley, as I've been involved in counseling situations, mostly from people outside the church, marriages unravel not because of these big things. It's because good things become more important than their spouse. That's what the spouse always complained. In fact, they did a research among South Asian marriages some time ago at a counseling seminar in Houston. And like I've shared before, the number one reason for South Asian marriages to break in the United States is not money or alcohol or affairs. It's actually in-laws. Where sometimes the husband or wife would say, my spouse's parents are more important than me. What her parents say or what his parents say is more important than what I say. He values his parents' love more than my love. Or sometimes a woman may say, his job is more important than me. He just works himself and that's really his first job. Or sometimes it ends up being hobbies that people have, right? Because the bottom line is, someone in the marriage is sensing that there is a competition for this love, that the real love is with something else or someone else. Sometimes the woman might get a career and the husband says that's her real love. She just kills herself with it. There's nothing wrong with a career. There's nothing wrong with work. There's nothing wrong with loving your parents or in-laws, or nothing wrong with going fishing or having a hobby. But when they become our primary love, then that marriage doesn't work. And that's God's concern. He's like, you guys are going to go into a new country. This is not just any new country. This is the land of Canaan. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. You're going to be treated with sudden affluence, sudden prosperity. You're going to encounter people who are big. They've already seen how the vegetation in that place were and how people were. So God is saying, if you're not clear in terms of our relationship, this is something when people are dating, you have to have this DTR conversation, right? Defining the relationship. God's doing that. Let's define our relationship now, before you go in and get carried away by what you see and hear and get lost and hurt yourself. Because I'm really jealous about you. And that's the foundation of what God is going to share in the next several verses. Having said this, and helping them understand who He is, and it is the same for you and I, He's a covenantal God. If we read these next few verses as something I need to do so that God will love me, we've completely missed the point. God has already redeemed you and I. And as His redeemed children, He's saying now, from a love relationship, this is what I expect. And that comes the covenantal principles, which is usually called the 10 Commandments. But actually, just like we heard, the text, it only talks of 10 words, where God is just giving them 10 words. It's beautiful. Some passages are wonderful to read in Hebrew, especially the Psalms and these texts. I really enjoyed going back to Hebrew and reading it. It's very crisp, very precise, but it's very powerful. And God has always told them, hey, I want to be your God. I want you to be my people. And these are just 2 great commandments. We read one last evening. There are 2 passages, Deuteronomy 6:5 and Leviticus 19:18. Deuteronomy 6:5 says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And Leviticus 19:18 says, love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus Himself in the New Testament says, the entire law hangs on these 2 principles, loving God and loving one another. And this is where it's happening. This is where God is giving them, I'm going to give you guys this blueprint. How you can have a vertical love relationship with me and how it can spill in horizontal ones. And this is called a moral law. And after this, He's going to give them a ceremonial law and a civil law. There are 601 of them, which we all know tend to transition and get obsolete by the time we come to the New Testament. But this one, the moral law, still holds. But why did God give them this? These commandments are not just random rules. They make sense to anybody if you read it. No matter what religion you believe in or what philosophy you hold, these are just wise and great words. But they expose something deeper. If you try to live by these 10 commandments, they will expose what you and I truly worship. Every commandment says Yahweh alone is God, and every sin says something else will save me. And that's what we're going to look at briefly through this. Perhaps I'd love to come back and do a 10-week series on each of these 10 commandments, maybe sometime next year or later. Let's walk through the commandments' principles. The first commandment, He says, is you shall have no other gods before me. The reason why God is saying this So we have to understand the context a little more. In ancient Israel, people believed in three categories of gods. There was a personal God, there was a family God, and there was a national God. And for most Israelites at most times, and for all people, other people who knew anything about Israel's God, Yahweh was just a national God. And ancient Israelites might have other gods like Dagon. You read about that in Judges 16:23 and 1 Chronicles 10:10 as their personal god, or perhaps Baal as their family god. They would always say Yahweh is our God, but at a family level, functionally and personal level, they will have a complete different God. No Israelite, no matter how totally immersed in worshiping any of these other personal or family gods, would ever answer no to the question, do you believe in Yahweh? Of course, Yahweh is our God. But at most times in Israel's history, would sadly see him only as a national God, one who brought them out of Egypt, to whom they would appeal in times of war. But their day-to-day loyalty in worship would be directed towards their various personal or family gods. We do the same, isn't it? Even here. Perhaps some of us will say, hey, I come from 5 generations of Christians. Like for me, my grandfather was a lay preacher. And there are people in my family who are very proud about that. But I know they really don't have a relationship with God. Some people, some of my family members or my wife's side, there's someone who's a bishop. There's others who are pastors, and they're very proud about it. When I met her cousin, who's married to a bishop, I was like, wow, I have a bishop in my family. And I felt like I married up. But really, when you talk more, you can see they really don't have a relationship with God at all. Maybe we don't have that here, but we may say we are Christians, but our functional gods can still be different. Success, reputation, money, approval, pleasure, control. It doesn't matter what religion you hold to, your actual functional God in the Silicon Valley can be any of these. We can say, yeah, I believe in God, but our daily trust, and this is the test, how do I know what my functional God is? Right? The test is to answer this question for us. If God removed your job tomorrow, would you still worship Him? Or would your worship collapse? Does your daily trust rest in your stock portfolio or your company's valuation, or maybe as parents in your college admissions for your children, or in our immigration security, or our health? They can all become our functional gods, isn't it? This question, if dash, you can put whatever it is removed, will I still worship Him? Reveals our functional gods. And God is jealous. He wants us to know that and pivot back to Him. Secondly, it says the same thing. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or an idol. An idol is anything that takes the place of God. Why people want idols is because they want something or someone who has the power to help them. And most of these idols offer false promises. They lie, whether it's a physical idol or it's something that we have made up in our mind. In fact, all idols are something that we have conjured up in our mind. The nature of idolatry is misunderstood by most of us. Idolatry was not merely the practice of worshiping by means of statues or pictures, but it was a rather entire elaborate religious system and lifestyle. All of it was running counter to what God desires true worship to be. Because when you create an idol, if we were to talk of animistic world religions where idols came mainly out of fear. When there is so much of forest everywhere, you don't know what's lurking behind the tree in the dark, perhaps a snake, perhaps a wild animal, an elephant or a beast. If you make that a god, it gives you a moral ability to overcome that fear, perhaps, right? And that's how it started. And then you create that and you put it in front of you and you speak to it and you believe that you're able to communicate. It's almost like you're on a Zoom call with this idol that, you think it can see you, and when you talk, they can hear you too. Even sometimes if people don't turn the video on, you're okay with that, right? You tend to think of it like that, perhaps. But when we don't have a physical idol like that, again, some of these things we spoke about can take the place of God. Modern idolatry is the same. Heart with new technology. They overpromise but underdeliver, right? Work becomes a god when it promises you identity. Money becomes a god when it promises you security. Pleasure becomes a god when it promises you comfort when you're stressed or you go through a difficult time without obedience. So what is consuming you, my dear friends? Is it security? Do you plunge yourself into work? Is it pleasure? Some of these ancient idols like the Greek idols, for instance. I was visiting Rome, and the Roman museums have all these idols that were popular by the Greek, and there is the Greek idol of the goddess Artemis or Diana. You can read about that in Ephesus. It was an idol where it defined a way of life. It involved having sensual pleasures as an element of worship. And so if you were worshiping the goddess Diana, your whole life also gets changed. You go to the temple not just to worship this god, but to also indulge your sensual pleasures. We have something like that in India called temple prostitution, right? From which we have Ida Scudder and others who came to rescue these girls from that. Because somehow, this is one of the most graphic ways where it says, well, if you come to God, you will get your pleasures satisfied. But maybe many of us will say, no, I don't worship the goddess Diana. Pleasure is not like that, but maybe there are soft ways in which you pursue it through, pornography or what's very rampant in Silicon Valley, work culture is emotional affairs with colleagues. There's nothing physical about it. Or you have a secret habit. Or you can indulge in dating without any boundaries. But God says you cannot bow to this idol of pleasure. If you would really want pleasure, the true pleasure that will satisfy you can only come in your relationship with me, and I alone can offer that. And he goes into more graphic detail about this particular word or command because it's significant. He says, if you read those verses for us, you shall not bow down to them, verse 5, or serve them, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. Sometimes people misquote this verse and say, oh, you have generational curse and you have to pray and break that. No, that's not what this verse is talking about. I'll prove that to you. But verse 6, it says, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. The reason he says that idolatry is dangerous and that he will not just be upset if this generation does it, but if the second and third generation do it, is because of how it was practiced. When people would visit some of these sensual gods, it was not just the fathers going, the fathers will take their sons with them. So they start following or doing these things that they have observed in their parents. And God is saying, if your second generation or third generation follow the same idols that you follow, I'm a jealous God and I will be angry. Part of love is a holy anger, isn't it? When we see that our children are indulging in some things that are not good for them, there is a place for us to be upset about it. And you will remain upset till they stop. That's not bad anger. That's a loving anger. And that's what God is saying. If you're going to influence your children and their children in these ways, my anger will be towards them. But if you are able to model to them the right worship, to worship me, it says, my grace extends to 1,000 generations, which shows the heart of God. He is more eager and wanting and willing and desiring to bless than to curse. And guess what? We have not had 1,000 generations yet from the start of humanity till now. That's the extraordinary grace of God for those who trust and love Him. And it's also a call for us as parents, as an application. Your children, like we heard even last night, are watching what you worship. If work is ultimate for you, they will learn work is ultimate for them. If achievement is ultimate for you, they will inherit anxiety if they feel they haven't achieved enough. But if Christ is ultimate for you, they will inherit stability and peace. This covenant God is making is a multi-generational covenant. Thirdly, He says, do not take my name in vain. What does it mean to not take God's name in vain? Simply means misrepresenting Him through unholy living. Like we make promises to claim legitimacy using God's name with an intent or an inability to keep it. And that maligns His name. It basically is living a hypocritical life. Looking like someone who says, I'm a Christian outside, but not actually believing or living like it. This is one of the main reasons why next generations leave their faith, because they see their parents claim to be Christian, but their life is so bad. How they fight and what they go after. And the last word that God has in terms of helping us to have a love relationship with Him is significant. It's both a command and a sign. Like covenants have all these signs. The Noahic covenant has the rainbow as a sign, which still remains. Its meaning hasn't changed. Abrahamic covenant had circumcision, which grows and evolves into baptism in the New Testament. And here, the sign of Mosaic commandment is the Sabbath sign, the sign of rest. And there are two reasons God is telling people you need to practice Sabbath. It also evolved from Sabbath to the Lord's Day, as we hear in the New Testament. Why does God want us to rest? To accomplish two things. He says when you practice the Lord's Day, you stop from things you're usually doing, and you use that day to grow or keep yourself holy. It's not just saying to take a break from work one day a week so that you can just focus on godliness. It says both are equally important. God builds rest into His covenantal life. Not a lazy rest, but a holy rest. Because God is saying, and this is something we need to hear a lot here in Silicon Valley, people who do easily 80, 90-hour work weeks, you are not a machine. You are not what you produce. European philosophers came up with, I am what I do. And this just repeats itself in human history. You are not what you do. You are not what you produce. God's people are to stop ordinary labor as much as possible and devote themselves to worship and renewal on the Lord's Day. And in Silicon Valley, Sabbath is warfare against the idol of productivity. If you cannot stop working, it communicates something seriously. Number one, of course, you made work your idol, right? But more than that, it communicates that something else is ruling your heart. You actually believe that you have to take care of your life. You don't trust that when you stop working, God is still working to take care of you. You're competing with God working and thinking that your work is going to make your life better than if you just stop and trust God to do what He does. And not just stopping work, it's not saying like don't do any work. Of course, you have to cook, you have to eat, you have to clean and all of that stuff, but try to take a break from your routine stuff. And this is sometimes very challenging. In Silicon Valley, I hear the pressure on our children. And I keep repeating this. Many of you may not like it, but I have to say it. Don't add another day of work to your children. They already have so much in school. Putting them in rigorous sports events, for example. By the way, I'm not against playing sports, especially if you're having a job that's sitting in school the whole week or sitting in a desk job the whole week. It's great to go out for a run or play a sport to refresh yourself. But if you make that a thing to add on, that can drain things. God wants us to take a break from those things and says, stop. Just calm down, slow down. You need to eliminate ruthlessly hurry in your life, and Sunday will help you to reset and recalibrate. Model that to your children. Spend time in worship and then hang out with your friends. Go for a hike with him, perhaps, or have a dinner, or visit someone who is sick and is not able to make it to church, and encourage them, pray for them. Don't put them into more schools, language schools, math symposium, exams, sports programs, because it tells you that you think they need that more for their future. This Chariots of Fire, Eric Liddell's story is so inspiring, isn't it, as a movie too? Some of you, if you haven't watched it, you should watch it with your children. How he gives up his one sport that he is good at to compete in the Olympics because it happens on a Sunday, and how God blesses him. This is something, even personally, as a value, is important for me. I've tried to practice this, passed it on to our children. I was very happy when Carissa is now, as you all know, in med school. Med school is grinding. They have to study 6 days a week or 7 days a week and have a quiz every other week and a block exam. And I was very happy that she made a decision that she will not take her quiz on Sunday. They have time from Friday to Monday. She made this decision early on that she will stop studying, but treat the Lord's Day as the Lord's Day and go to church and fellowship with friends. It didn't start now. It started in her childhood days. And God has honored that. Guess what? She hasn't lost anything in her life, academically or personally. God has blessed it abundantly. And so here's living proof and inspiration for you to not get so stressed about doing all these things for your children. What you do on Sunday reveals your true rest. In the next 6 verses, God talks about how to now love our neighbors with covenant integrity. And it starts with honor your father and mother. For children, including adult children, we are called to honor our parents. It's carried over in the New Testament too, isn't it? The apostles write about this. It says, do this so you will live long lives. And the idea is it's not in a magical way because our parents have our best interests. Solomon, the wisest king who ever lived, wrote an entire book of Proverbs for his children so they don't make the same mistakes he made. He wants them to live with wisdom and make right choices. And that's the reason, even if it doesn't make to your kids, for the children who are living here, the question you should never be asking your parents, which you always ask anyways, is when they tell you to do something, why? Well, there's only one answer for all your whys, because they love you and they know what's better for you. So you just have to listen. That's the way you honor your parents. Don't fight, don't argue, don't raise your voice against your parents. They are a God-given authority. As long as you're living under your parents' roof, they are responsible for you, and you owe it to them to listen to them, to honor them, and obey them, whether you like it or not. If they mess up, it's between them and God. And it's for our good. He says, when you're going into this new country, as children, you're going to grow in this culture around people who have no history with me. So listen to your parents who have a history with me. They know that I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They know what I have done to the patriarchs. They know what I have done to them as a nation. They will guide you. And for us who are older, we honor our parents by caring for them, even in their old age. Not just sending them to some retirement homes. That's a critique I have about this culture. I can never understand it. Maybe I'm missing something culturally. But to me, it is your responsibility and my responsibility, the way as adult children to honor our parents, is to care for them as much as possible. And that's one of the big challenges, the immigration creates, where most of us are unable to go back. But if you have a sibling or a family member, we need to be providing that care to our parents to show we honor them. Next, he moves on to say, do not commit murder. Murder is just an extreme form of anger or hatred or intolerance to someone who hurts you, right? It starts with Cain. But what murder reflects is that you don't believe that God is going to exact his justice on someone who has wronged you and that you have to be God. That's really the hard thing with murder. You want to take control. And that's why Christ makes it internal. He says you don't have to kill someone. Even if you speak angry words, it's murder, isn't it? Maybe we say, I'm not an angry person. I don't speak angry words in modern culture. We have cancel culture. You can just simply cancel someone if what they say is something you don't like. You can show your contempt nowadays through social media. Just click unfollow. Oh, I'm going to unfollow. Or you can exit that WhatsApp group to show your anger. Soft expressions of anger. You're bitter with someone in your family. You're bitter with a friend who's probably giving you some godly counsel. You don't like it. You can just cancel them in your mind. These are seeds of murder, and Jesus internalizes the command. He says, before you say, I've never killed anyone, ask yourself, who have I dismissed as worthless? Someone who counseled you, spoke truth to you, has a different view than you, then you've done the same. Next, he talks about adultery, the idol of pleasure, which makes you cross boundaries. This is to protect marriage, and adultery, we all know, begins long before a physical act. It begins first with comparison, begins with fantasy, begins with emotional closeness secretly. So if you're nurturing something your spouse does not know about, you're already stepping outside a covenant. And then he talks about stealing. Do not steal. It's straight addressed to the idolatry of money that makes you believe you want to steal because you want more, because you believe money will solve all problems. And maybe we don't steal. We'll say, I don't steal and I have a lot of money. But it can express itself in wanting to cheat on your taxes or filing false or exaggerated expense reports when you travel to justify certain dubious expenses, right? And there's even another form of stealing. It talks about not tithing to your church, where God says, you're stealing God, you're stealing from me when you're not giving what I want you to give to the church, because the money, it's not that God needs your money, it's to see, are you holding your money or is money holding you? So if you find it, that's why when people come to pray, they talk about God loves a cheerful giver. You cannot give cheerfully. If the thought comes as soon as someone comes to pray to give, oh man, I feel like taking this money away from me, then money is holding you. You're not holding them. And he talks of false witness. It's basically lying. Soft lies, white lies. We lie to save face. But lying is often just self-worship, isn't it? We don't want people to think bad about us, protecting our image, controlling how people see us. And lastly, it talks about coveting, which is, again, a heart level thing. This is a desire that's gone crooked. It comes because of envy or discontent or resentment. Coveting is something which basically you tell God, you didn't give me enough. Look at them. They have that, this and this. Why did you not give this to me? We live in a culture of, some social media that really can get to us, right? Like LinkedIn promotions. You see someone getting promoted and everyone congratulating. Oh, I'm so happy for you. And they're really not happy. And this guy got promoted over me, my team. I worked so hard. I met all the deliverables and KPI and they promoted. But on LinkedIn, you have to say, so happy for you. You're amazing, isn't it? Or you see all these Instagram vacations people post. Exotic places like perfect shots with a mirror image on a lake of all those scenic settings. Or college announcements. Hey, my kid made it to XYZ, Coveting becomes normalized, isn't it? Coveting basically says, God, you gave them better. Contentment says, God, you gave me enough. So what do these commandments do? We can go on and on. They don't just restrain behavior. The purpose of the law is they expose our idols. They reveal to us our heart's intricate inability to adhere to them. They don't just restrain behavior. They expose our idols. They show us we need more than rules, we need renewal. And then comes the covenantal outcome. Verse 18 says, now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off and said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die. Moses said to the people, do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. The people stood far off while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. The outcome was that the presence of God invoked fear, and they did not want to go near. Not just because of these, but because they knew that they had messed up on all of these categories that God is talking to them. Moses had told them, even if you come and touch the mountain without consecrating, you will die. And even priests had to purify themselves. They did not want to die. They knew the holiness of God, what God expects, what God demands, and their abject, absolute inability to do it. And that's your condition and mine. The law can inform you, but it can never transform you. Let me repeat, the law can inform you, but it can never transform you. And that's what we read in the book of Galatians. Paul says the law is a schoolmaster to lead us to Christ. Can tell you cannot do this. You cannot do this. And God is holy. You cannot enter his presence by yourself. And so the Israelites needed a mediator. They looked at Moses and said, well, God is not messing with Moses. Moses is able to go. He's able to be in God's presence. So they said, leave us alone, Moses. We don't want to die. You just go. They knew they needed a mediator. His words were assuring. Moses was able to tell them, do not fear. And he drew near, and they could not see what Moses saw. He drew into what seemed as darkness to them. But what Moses could not do, we have someone greater than Moses, who is Jesus. Galatians 4:4, we read that in the fullness of time, God sent his only Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who are under the law. The curse that you and I felt because we breached God's law, for which we could die, was taken up by Jesus himself. Jesus was the better mediator. Moses did not have the power to change the people. Jesus obeyed the law you and I broke. Jesus bore the curse you and I deserve. And Jesus comes and abides in us as His Holy Spirit to write the law in our hearts. We don't have to go to the mountain top to have a God experience. Christianity is the only faith practice where this God comes into our heart, timid, and is contained, and writes that law not on tablets of stone, but into our hearts, and empowers us to live like that. And that should help us to get back to this God, isn't it? And He gives us strength to do all these through what we have seen as ordinary means of grace. The Word, the sacraments, prayer, fellowship, mission. Because God has redeemed us. He claims our loyalty. His law exposes our idols, and His mediator brings us near. The law exposes, but Christ restores, and the Spirit empowers. That's the sum and essence of this sermon. So draw near. So how should we live? Not as slaves trying to earn love, but as redeemed sons and daughters learning covenant loyalty. God gives commands as covenant love. So come to Him for communion. Identify your idols. Confess where you have misrepresented God. Practice the day of rest, the Lord's day. Repair relationships where you've broken any of these, and run to Christ and not away from Him. Jesus has already entered the darkness, so He can be the light of our lives. And He is the light, John says, who lights every man born in this world.